This is it. Welcome to the Galaxy Note 10 Plus Ultimate Battery Comparison, and in this video I'm comparing it to, for most people, what will be its biggest competitors, the S10 Plus, the iPhone XS Max, Huawei P30 Pro and OnePlus 7 Pro on the far right. What you're seeing right now is me using a luxometer to calibrate display brightness. I wanted to make sure, more importantly than them all being on max brightness, that they're on an equivalent brightness level. I just think that's a fairer test, and it answers what I'd say is a more important question: which one of these phones gives you more battery life whilst offering a similar viewing experience? So, I've started this test off with a game called Battlelands Royale. I'd say it's mid-tier in terms of how graphically demanding it is, and generally speaking in this test we're going to try and stick to relatively day-to-day scenarios, just to simulate how long your battery would actually last in the real world. Now, if you take a look at the specifications below the Note 10 Plus on the far left, you'll see there's quite a few reasons why this is a really interesting phone to battery test. First of all, most importantly, it has the largest battery out of any smartphone here, and one of the largest batteries out of any conventional mainline phone. That's a good thing. But there's more. The phone is also using Samsung's brand new Exynos 9825 chip. And you might remember, especially in the last generation, Samsung's Exynos chips trailed their Snapdragon equivalents by quite a fair margin, and so this is Samsung's answer to that. Even compared to the chip released in the Galaxy S10 in the same year, the Note 10 should in theory be more efficient and more powerful. However, the Note 10 Plus, as well as all these positive things, also has the largest display amongst all these phones, and so that might well work against it, we'll have to see. So right now we're actually on YouTube, we're watching older Mr. Who's the Boss videos, and we've reached well past the hour mark, and I'm going to leave this on for around about another half an hour before we move on to the next thing. And whilst that's happening, if we take a look at the battery percentages on the top of the phones, you can see that the Huawei P30 Pro is leading, but just about. In terms of the 4 Android phones, it's a really close battle so far, with the iPhone slipping behind. And to be honest, that in itself is exciting. Whilst I wouldn't call it a battery hero, the iPhone XS Max already has pretty good battery life, and so if this early on into the test, the other 4 phones are already this far ahead, that bodes well for their longevity. So right now I've actually pulled up a slime simulator, which is a weird kind of thrill. But while this is going, I kind of wanted to clarify a few of the things I've done to make this as fair a test as possible. So, for example, I've set all the smartphones to 1080p resolution, except for the iPhone, which can't be adjusted. The reason I've done that is because even though they may support a higher resolution, almost every Android smartphone out there comes set to 1080p by default out the box, and so it is what 98% of people are going to use, myself included. When it comes to displays though, you'll also notice if you look at the specs of the OnePlus 7 Pro that display has a 90Hz refresh rate. It is refreshing 1.5 times more frequently than with the other phones at 60Hz. So on one hand, just bear in mind that is probably going to hit the battery pretty hard, but on the other hand, it needs to, because this is one of the primary selling points of the smartphone. We've got to use it. I've also just made sure that all the settings on the phones are the same, so Bluetooth, NFC, location and Wi-Fi, they're all on, and all phones have the latest updates, and their speakers are on 50% volume. We're trying to make it as standard a use case as possible. So, back to what's happening in the battery test, and you might have noticed I've been slowly creeping our way through increasingly intensive games, peaking here at Shadowgun Legends, and this has created quite a disparity in terms of what battery is remaining on each device. You've got the Note on the far left, which is holding up pretty well with 59%, and right at the bottom is the iPhone, closer to 30%. So what I'm doing right now is recording 4K video from the phone's rear cameras, and I'm going to do this continuously for a loop of 3 times, and then open that up in a video editor. But one thing you might have noticed is that on the Note 10 Plus, the iPhone XS Max, and the P30 Pro, the displays have been dimmed drastically. These 3 phones have clearly sent some sort of signal that they're overheating, and so this is like a precautionary measure that the phone takes. So for those 3 devices, I had to restart them. So we're now passing the 4-hour 30 mark, and I'd say in a test like this, once you get to 5 hours, you're good. You've got a respectable battery life, because not only are the screens continuously on, but we're running some intense applications. Also, if you're looking really carefully, you might have noticed on the 2 Samsung phones that there are bars of signal. Now, none of these phones actually have SIM cards in because that would make it an unfair test, but for some reason this is just what Samsung software does. Also worth noting, just to make sure that none of the phones have started deteriorating, I've made sure that each device here is a next to new version of that phone, so less than 15 charging cycles on each. Okay, so we're about to have our first casualty, the iPhone XS Max, and to be fair, it's lasted nearly 6 hours, so I'm happy. And in that time, a couple of interesting things have happened. You can probably tell on the far right that the OnePlus has settled into a comfortable last position. It's nearly at 10% now, but more interestingly, the Galaxy S10 Plus has overtaken the Note 10 Plus. Now, I gotta say, part of me expected this, because the Note 10 Plus has a very minor increase in efficiency and battery size, but a fairly major increase in display size. The 6.8 inches on the Note 10 Plus, it doesn't sound like a lot more than the 6.4 on the S10 Plus, but it is. In terms of raw screen area, it is a sizable jump. So, we're back on YouTube watching some even older Mr. Who's the Boss videos, and it's good to see that all smartphones can cope with this. Watching videos doesn't cause much of a problem to any of them. As we start to approach the 7-hour mark, you can see the OnePlus flagging and then eventually dying, but to be honest, that is a really good performance, especially because of that 90Hz refresh rate, which I've seen a lot of people talking about on Twitter. People just love it, and it keeps them coming back to that phone. So for a lot of people, the trade-off is clearly quite worth it. Down to 3 phones, and any of these devices is going to be fantastic for battery life, but there is something about the P30 Pro that just gives you ultimate peace of mind. You might have seen the video I made where I took that on a road trip for 2 extreme days of usage and it powered through. The endurance combined with the charging speed means it's the kind of battery you just forget about. It's not a worry anymore. And the Note 10 Plus and S10 Plus are not that far off. By the time the Note dies, the S10 has about 3% remaining, so I'm pretty much just going to fast forward this test until all the phones are gone, and then let's talk about the final results. Okay, so in 5th position is the iPhone XS Max with a time of 5 hours and 48 minutes. This is the kind of battery that you're pretty happily going to get through one day of use with. The OnePlus 7 Pro was a leap in front of that. This thing lasted almost an hour longer, and day to day that is a kind of difference you're definitely going to notice. The Note 10 Plus was even more impressive than this with 7 hours and 2 minutes, and whilst it's not the most surprising result, we almost could have predicted it based on the specs alone, this phone could last you well into your second day. The Galaxy S10 Plus was even ahead of that, but by a pretty negligible margin, so essentially don't pick one of those phones over the other based on battery life alone. And finally, the P30 Pro, which didn't just win but also created a good bit of distance between itself and second place. 7 hours and 31 is an incredible time for a test like this. And so, Huawei still remains the battery king, and I can't wait to see what's next. If you enjoyed this video, I've got a ton of content on the Note 10 Plus, the P30 Pro, and even a couple of phones that are yet to be announced, coming very soon, so if you could subscribe for that, that would be amazing. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.